The morning sun cast long shadows through the cracked windows of Collins' Auto Repair, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stale air like ghosts of better times. Sarah Collins flipped the light switch with practiced resignation, watching half the fluorescent bulbs flicker to life, while the others remained dark, their burned-out filaments as lifeless as her bank account. The garage had been her father's pride for 32 years before his heart gave out last winter. Now it was hers along with all its problems. The hydraulic lift wheezed as she pressed the button, and the ancient coffee maker gurgled to life, its rich aroma filling the quiet space. That dark roast was her one daily luxury, and she inhaled deeply, savoring the moment of calm before another day of barely scraping by. Sarah's eyes drifted to the folded American flag displayed prominently on the office wall, positioned between her father's mechanic certification and a faded photo of two sisters working on an old motorcycle. 3 years ago, she had imagined a different life entirely. Maybe college, perhaps following her older sister Jessica into the military. But Dad's health had declined steadily. Jessica was deployed to Afghanistan, and someone had to keep the family business running. The flag represented everything Sarah had lost. Jessica Collins, Staff Sergeant, United States Army, killed in action when an RPG struck her convoy outside Kandahar. 26 years old, with her whole life ahead of her, reduced to ceremony and condolences. Sarah still kept the last letter Jessica had written, but never sent, found among her personal effects. The words were burned into Sarah's memory. "I'll come home, little sister. We'll finish that Harley restoration together. I promise." But promises, Sarah had learned, were fragile things in a world of improvised explosive devices and foreign wars. The quiet morning shattered with the metallic clang of the mail slot. Sarah sighed as she gathered the envelopes from the floor, her stomach tightening as she recognized the familiar collection of bills, advertisements, and one official-looking letter from First National Bank. She didn't need to open it to know what it said. The third notice about the overdue mortgage on the garage. $35,000 overdue, with 90 days before foreclosure proceedings would begin. She thought about Jessica's life insurance payout, already spent on Dad's medical bills and funeral expenses. Thought about the business loan she'd taken to keep the lights on, now in default. Thought about the conversations she'd avoided having with her landlord about the overdue rent on her apartment upstairs. At 29, Sarah felt like she was drowning in the wreckage of everyone else's dreams. The bell above the door jingled, and Lucas Martinez stepped inside. The 19-year-old had perpetually oil-stained hands and eager eyes that reminded Sarah of herself at that age, back when the future seemed full of possibilities instead of foreclosure notices. His father, Roberto Martinez, had been a Marine who came back from Iraq with one leg and too many nightmares. Roberto had been Jessica's friend, had served in the same forward operating base before his injuries sent him home early. Lucas had been hanging around the garage since he was 12, drawn by the smell of motor oil and the satisfaction of fixing broken things. Sarah had finally put him on part-time payroll last year, though payroll was often whatever cash she could spare at the end of the week. "Morning, boss. Mr. Henderson's Camry ready for pickup. Just needs an oil change." Sarah quickly folded the bank notice into her pocket. "Alignments done, brake pads replaced. Should be good to go by noon." Lucas nodded, then pointed to the small laptop open on the workbench. "What's that, just browsing?" But there was something in her voice that made Lucas lean closer to the screen. Sarah had been scrolling through classified ads with the desperate hope of finding something, anything, that might represent opportunity instead of obligation. The screen showed a local listing that had caught her attention despite herself. 1965 Ford Mustang Fastback. Needs total restoration. 600 OBO. Sold as is. 600 for a 65 Mustang. Lucas's eyes widened. That's got to be a scam, or it's just a rusted frame sitting in somebody's backyard. Sarah zoomed in on the single blurry photo. The car was partially covered by a tarp sitting in what looked like an old barn. Even in this condition, if the frame was solid, it would be worth thousands. The sensible part of her mind knew she couldn't afford another project car, especially one that would need everything from tires to transmission. But something about that shadowy silhouette called to her. Maybe it was the memory of working alongside her father, learning that every machine had a soul worth saving. Maybe it was the ghost of Jessica's laughter when they'd restored that old Harley together, turning rust and neglect into something beautiful and powerful. Or maybe it was just desperation wearing the mask of hope. "You thinking about it?" Lucas asked carefully. Sarah closed the laptop with more force than necessary. "Just looking. We've got enough project cars taking up space. Can't afford to feed another hungry restoration." But her eyes lingered on the blank screen, and Lucas noticed everything. That afternoon brought the usual parade of oil changes and brake jobs, the bread and butter work, that kept the lights on but never quite caught up with the bills. Sarah's hands moved automatically through familiar motions, while her mind wandered to possibilities and problems in equal measure. When the last customer left and Lucas headed home to help his father with physical therapy, Sarah found herself alone with the silence and the weight of decisions she couldn't afford to make. She reopened the laptop and stared at the Mustang listing. $600 was nearly everything she had left in her personal account. It was rent money, grocery money, the thin buffer between barely making it and complete failure. But it was also exactly the kind of project that had once brought her joy back when restoration meant possibility instead of just another expense. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed before she could change her mind. The voice that answered was weathered and direct, like someone who'd spent decades making hard decisions look easy. "Peterson," he introduced himself, "handling an estate sale for the county. Previous owners were long gone and the bank just wanted the asset off their books. Been sitting in that barn for near 20 years, he explained when Sarah asked about the car's condition. Mice got to the interior, weather got to the paint, but the bones might still be solid. "You know anything about these old cars?" "A little. My father taught me that every machine deserves a second chance if someone's willing to do the work." Peterson gave her directions to a property 30 miles outside town, down dirt roads, that hadn't seen maintenance since the Clinton administration. As Sarah drove her battered pickup truck through increasingly rural landscape, she wondered if she was chasing salvation or accelerating her own destruction. The property, when she finally found it, had clearly seen much better days. A weathered farmhouse sat on a hill overlooking a collection of outbuildings in various states of decay. Peterson was waiting by a barn that looked like it had weathered every storm since the Great Depression. He was exactly what Sarah had expected from his voice, tall, lean, with the kind of hands that had known decades of honest work. "Been here about an hour getting things ready," he said as they walked toward the barn. "Fair warning, it's not pretty, but sometimes the best things are hiding under the worst surfaces." The padlock opened with a protesting screech that echoed off the barn walls. Peterson pulled the heavy wooden door wide, revealing shadows and dust motes dancing in afternoon light. And there, like a sleeping beast in a forgotten cave, sat the Mustang. Even covered by 15 years of neglect, Sarah could see the distinctive fastback profile that had made the '65 Mustang an icon. The once vibrant paint had faded to a ghostly red, with rust claiming territory along the rocker panels and wheel wells. The tires were flat, windows clouded with grime, and the interior, visible through the driver's side window, showed cracked leather in a headliner that drooped like old skin. But Sarah wasn't seeing the decay. She was seeing her father's hands guiding hers as she learned to gap spark plugs on their neighbor's classic Ford. She was seeing Jessica's face lighting up with pure joy when they'd fired up that old Harley for the first time after months of patient work. She was seeing potential where others would see only problems. Engine seized, most likely. Peterson watched her circle the vehicle slowly, noting how she checked panel gaps and frame rails, with the practiced eye of someone who understood the difference between surface problems and structural damage. "You really know what you're looking at, don't you? My dad used to say that every machine tells a story if you know how to listen." Sarah ran her hand along the hood, feeling for the telltale signs of accident damage or rust through. "This one's been loved. You can tell by the way it was put away. Someone covered it, carefully positioned it to avoid the worst of the weather." Peterson nodded approvingly. The previous owner took real good care of it before circumstances changed. Sometimes life forces people to abandon things they love. "What happened to them?" Peterson's expression grew carefully neutral. "Estate sale covers a lot of situations. Privacy laws prevent me from saying much more than that. But I can tell you this much: the family wants it to go to someone who'll appreciate what it could become, not just strip it for parts." Sarah understood. She'd seen enough estate sales to recognize the careful language of grief and legal obligation. Someone had died, someone had loved this car, and now it needed a new home with people who couldn't bear to keep it, but couldn't stand to see it destroyed. $600. It was insane, irresponsible, the kind of decision that would probably accelerate her slide toward bankruptcy. But standing in that dusty barn, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just for the car, but for herself. For the possibility that she could still build something meaningful from broken pieces. I'll take it. Peterson seemed surprised by her quick decision. You sure a lot of work ahead of you with a project like this? The biggest challenges usually hide the best rewards. Sarah pulled out her checkbook, hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing. I can arrange a tow truck tomorrow if that works for you. Peterson accepted the check and began filling out title paperwork with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. As he worked, Sarah noticed something interesting. His glances toward the farmhouse on the hill weren't casual. There was purpose there, as if he were following instructions or reporting to someone. Everything legal and legitimate, she asked. Absolutely. Peterson handed her the signed title. County's been handling this property for months. Bank just wants these assets liquidated so they can close the books. But something in his manner suggested there was more to the story. A slight hesitation, a careful choice of words, the sense that he was following a script rather than simply conducting business. The next afternoon, Sarah watched the Mustang being lowered onto the concrete floor of Collins Auto Repair. Lucas had taken the day off from classes to help with the delivery, and his excitement was infectious. You actually did it. Lucas walked around the car with the reverence of someone discovering a religious artifact. You're either the bravest person I know or completely crazy. Probably both, Sarah admitted, already pulling on her work gloves. But crazy's gotten me this far. They spent the rest of the day conducting a thorough assessment. The seats came out first, revealing floorboards that had miraculously avoided serious rust damage. The carpet was another story, entirely moldy and rotted home to generations of mice who had made themselves comfortable in the forgotten Ford. In the glove compartment, they found the original owner's manual, and something that made Sarah's breath catch: a faded photograph of a young man in military dress uniform standing proudly beside the car when it was new. His smile was confident, full of the kind of hope that only comes with youth and unlimited possibility. Wonder who he was, Lucas said carefully, placing the photo on the workbench. Sarah studied the image intently. The young soldier couldn't have been more than 22, with dark hair and intense eyes that seemed oddly familiar. There was something about his bearing, the way he stood beside the car with such obvious pride, that reminded her of Jessica's military photos. Whoever owned it loved it deeply. That's obvious from how well it was maintained. She pointed to details visible in the photo: the pristine paint, the carefully polished chrome, the attention to every small detail. Something significant must have happened for it to end up abandoned in that barn. By the fifth day of their evening work sessions, they had the hood open and were confronting the straight-six engine that had been the Mustang's heart. It was seized solid as expected. Oil had turned to sludge, hoses were cracked and brittle, and the carburetor had become a permanent home for what appeared to be several generations of bird families. But as Sarah worked her way through the engine compartment with the methodical patience her father had taught her, her trained eye began to notice details that didn't quite fit the expected pattern of neglect and decay. The wiring harness had been modified at some point, with additional leads running to locations that served no obvious mechanical purpose. The firewall showed signs of welding that was newer than the surrounding metal cleaner and more precise than typical repair work. And tucked beneath the master cylinder, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, was a small metal tab that definitely didn't belong in a factory-stock Mustang. Lucas, bring that work light over here. Sarah was elbow-deep in the engine compartment, following the mysterious additional wiring, when the bell above the door chimed with his familiar, tinny announcement. We're closed, she called without looking up, her voice muffled by the engine compartment. I'm not here for a repair, a deep voice replied. Sarah extracted herself from under the hood and turned to see an older man standing just inside the doorway. He was tall, with military straight posture despite his obvious age, silver hair, neatly trimmed in a style that suggested decades of habit rather than fashion. His eyes carried the weight of profound loss, the kind of grief that becomes part of a person's fundamental structure. He wore a simple button-down shirt tucked into well-pressed jeans, a worn leather jacket, despite the warm spring evening, and work boots that had clearly seen years of honest use. Everything about him spoke of competence, integrity, and deep sadness, carefully controlled. Can I help you with something? The man's gaze moved past her to the partially dismantled Mustang, and Sarah watched his expression transform. Recognition relief, something that might have been gratitude, and underneath it all, a pain so deep it made her heart ache in sympathy. "My name is David Hayes," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "and I believe you bought my son's car." Sarah tensed immediately, her defenses rising with practiced speed. "I have the title." The sale was completely legitimate. David raised his hands peacefully, understanding her concern. "I'm not here to contest the sale. The car is yours fair and square." He took a careful step closer, his eyes never leaving the Mustang. "I just wanted to see it, to know who had it now." Lucas had quietly moved closer to Sarah, sensing tension he didn't understand but ready to provide support if needed. "Your son," Sarah asked carefully. "He was the original owner." David nodded, reaching into his jacket to remove a worn leather folder that looked like it had been handled countless times over many years. "His name was Marcus Hayes. He bought this Mustang when he was 17, saved for it from summer jobs and weekend work at the local auto parts store. We restored it together, spent 2 years getting every detail perfect." His voice caught slightly on the memories. "He was going to take it to a classic car show in Dallas when he got back from his tour." The word tour hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her gaze flickered automatically to the folded flag on her office wall, and she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with recognition of shared loss. Military Army Special Operations, Afghanistan, 2009. David's jaw tightened with the kind of pain that never truly fades. He didn't come home. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. Sarah's expression softened as she recognized the specific quality of grief they both carried, the particular weight of losing someone to a distant war fought in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said simply, meaning every word. David nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy with the dignity of someone who had learned to bear unbearable things. "After he died, I couldn't face looking at the car. Too many memories, too much pain. I just covered it up and left it in that barn. Couldn't sell it to strangers, couldn't bring myself to look at it. For 15 years, it sat there gathering dust while I tried to figure out what Marcus would have wanted me to do with it." Sarah frowned, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. "You arranged the sale, the classified ad." David's eyes met hers directly. "I wanted to see who would respond. What kind of person would be drawn to a car in that condition?" He gestured toward the Mustang. "Most of the people who came were parts hunters looking to strip it down and sell the pieces. Classic car flippers who saw dollar signs instead of history. You were the only one who looked at it and saw something worth saving completely." He held out the leather folder. "These belong to Marcus. Build sheets, restoration notes, photographs of every step of the process. I thought maybe you could use them." Sarah hesitated before accepting the folder, sensing that she was being offered more than just documentation. "I don't understand. Why give these to me? Why not keep them?" David's gaze returned to the Mustang, and for a moment Sarah could see past his controlled exterior to the father who had spent 15 years carrying unbearable loss. Because that car was never just transportation to Marcus. It was his legacy, something he poured his heart and soul into. Every bolt he turned, every panel he straightened, every hour he spent covered in grease and determination. He believed in doing things the right way and building something that would last long after he was gone. David's voice grew stronger. "I think he would have wanted it in the hands of someone who truly understands what that means." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key, old and worn smooth by years of use, with a small metal tag attached by a leather cord. "You'll need this too. It's the original ignition key. Marcus always said the car should be started with its own key, not some generic replacement." As Sarah took the key, their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about honoring the memory of someone who had given everything for his country, about completing something left unfinished by forces beyond anyone's control. "I'll do right by it," Sarah said quietly. "I promise you that." David nodded, satisfied by something he saw in her expression. At the door, he paused without looking back. "Marcus always said you could tell everything about a mechanic by how they treated the cars other people had given up on." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I think he would have approved of you, Miss Collins." After David left, Sarah and Lucas stood in silence, the weight of the encounter settling around them like dust after a storm. So Lucas finally said, voice hushed with newfound reverence, I guess this really isn't just another project car anymore. Sarah looked down at the key in her palm, then at the leather folder in her other hand. The metal was still warm from David's touch, carrying with it 15 years of grief, hope, and patient waiting. No, she said quietly, it definitely isn't. That night, long after Lucas had gone home to help his father with evening medication, Sarah sat at her cluttered desk with David's leather folder open before her. The contents were meticulously organized, telling the story of a young man's passionate dedication to perfection. The original bill of sale from 1965, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. Handwritten restoration notes in neat penmanship that spoke of patience and attention to detail. Parts receipts saved and categorized by system, engine, transmission, electrical, interior. And photographs that chronicled every stage of the transformation from neglected used car to showpiece. The photos told a story more eloquent than any words could capture. A teenage Marcus, working alongside his father, both in grease-stained work clothes, smiling beside the dismantled Mustang, in what was clearly David's garage. The same pair installing a rebuilt engine, their faces showing the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something beautiful through honest work. Marcus, now a young man, standing proudly next to the completed restoration, the Mustang gleaming cherry red in afternoon sunlight. In every image, there was unmistakable pride and love, a bond between father and son forged through shared purpose and mutual respect for craftsmanship. But it was the last photo that stopped Sarah cold and changed everything. Marcus, in army fatigue, standing beside the Mustang before his final deployment. His expression was more serious now, weighted with responsibility, but no less determined. And pinned to his uniform jacket was something that made Sarah's heart skip several beats. A unit patch she recognized immediately. The same patch Jessica had worn, the same unit designation, the same forward operating base in Afghanistan. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for Jessica's last letter, the one found among her personal effects after the convoy attack. She spread it beside Marcus's photo and read the familiar words with new understanding. Tell Sarah I tried to help that kid from Texas, Marcus something. Smart soldier asking too many of the right questions about equipment manifests. Someone needs to listen to him. The weapons we're seeing don't match what's supposed to be here. Something's wrong, sis. Really wrong. The letter had been dated 3 days before Jessica died. Marcus had died less than a week later. Sarah stared at the two photographs side by side. Her sister and Marcus Hayes, both young, both dedicated, both dead in the same distant war, under circumstances that had never quite made sense. Jessica's convoy had been hit by an RPG that intelligence reports suggested was more sophisticated than typical insurgent weapons. Marcus's helicopter had crashed during what was described as a routine night operation. No survivors, no witnesses. Tucked into the back of David's folder was an envelope marked simply, "For the next owner." Sarah's hands shook as she opened it, unfolding a handwritten letter that began with words that would change her life forever, to whoever finds themselves the caretaker of this Mustang. If you're reading this, then either I've decided to sell my car, which seems unlikely, or something has happened to me, and fate has brought you into this story. Given my current situation, I suspect it's the latter. This car might look like just metal and rubber to some people, but to me, it's been a journey shared with my father. We restored it together during a time when we were learning to understand each other as men, not just father and son. Every bolt we turned taught us something about patience, precision, and the value of building things that last. I don't know who you are, but if you're reading this, I have several requests. First, don't just restore this car to factory specifications. Make it yours. Honor its past while creating something new. This Mustang has carried my dreams and my father's wisdom. Now it can carry yours. Second, and this is crucial, if you find something unusual hidden in this car, it's there for a very specific reason. What you do with it is your choice, but I ask that you consider carefully what's right. Some secrets deserve to be buried, but others need to see daylight no matter the cost. Third, if you happen to know a soldier named Jessica Collins, tell her that Marcus Hayes tried to do the right thing. Tell her the weapons manifests don't match what's really happening over here. Tell her someone is making a fortune from our blood, and that fortune has a name. If I don't make it back, and if you're brave enough to dig deeper, look for the connection between Operation Desert Wind and Westbrook Holdings. Look for the money trail that leads from dead soldiers to offshore accounts. Look for the truth that powerful people will kill to protect. The car knows how to keep secrets. Now it's time for those secrets to be revealed. Marcus Hayes. March 15th, 2009. Sarah read the letter 3 times each pass, revealing new layers of meaning and implication. Her sister had been trying to help Marcus expose something. Marcus had been investigating weapons irregularities. Both had died within days of each other, half a world away, under circumstances that had satisfied official inquiry, but had never felt right to the people who loved them. She looked through the office window at the partially dismantled Mustang, seeing it now, not just as a restoration project, but as a time capsule. A message sent across 15 years from a dead soldier to someone with the skills and determination to uncover whatever he had hidden. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. The car knows how to keep secrets. Now it's time for those secrets to be revealed. Tomorrow, Sarah would begin the most important restoration of her life. Not just bringing a classic car back to life, but potentially uncovering the truth about why her sister and Marcus Hayes had really died in Afghanistan. She had no idea that her search would put her in the crosshairs of men who had killed to protect their secrets and would kill again to keep them buried. What she did know, as she carefully folded Marcus's letter and placed it next to Jessica's, was that some promises transcend death. Her sister had tried to help Marcus expose the truth. Now Sarah would finish what they had started. The key to Marcus's Mustang felt heavy in her palm, but it was nothing compared to the weight of truth waiting to be discovered. Tomorrow she would begin looking for whatever Marcus Hayes had hidden in his father's car. Tomorrow she would start down a path that would either destroy her or finally bring justice for the soldiers who had died trying to do what was right. Outside, the small town of Millbrook settled into its quiet evening rhythms, unaware that a conspiracy 15 years in the making was about to be unearthed by a struggling mechanic with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The restoration would begin tomorrow. The truth would follow soon after. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystal clarity that only comes after sleepless nights spent wrestling with life-changing revelations. Sarah stood in her garage at dawn, staring at the Mustang with eyes that had been opened to possibilities she'd never imagined. The car looked different, transformed from a simple restoration project into something that carried the weight of history and the promise of justice. Marcus's letter lay folded in her pocket next to Jessica's 2 pieces of paper that had bridged 15 years of silence and connected her to a conspiracy that reached from Afghan battlefields to the highest levels of American power. The morning light streaming through the garage windows seemed to illuminate not just dust motes and engine parts, but the ghosts of soldiers who had died trying to do what was right. Sarah had spent the sleepless hours since reading Marcus's letter, trying to process the implications. Her sister Jessica hadn't just been another casualty of war. She had been murdered along with Marcus Hayes to protect a conspiracy that was still active, still dangerous, still claiming lives to protect profits built on the graves of American soldiers. Lucas arrived early, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the shop down the street and wearing the expression of someone who sensed that everything had changed overnight. The 19-year-old had always been perceptive, picking up on moods and undercurrents that others missed. This morning he could clearly see that Sarah was carrying a burden that hadn't been there the day before. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, handing her one of the steaming cups. "Maybe I have." Sarah took a long sip, gathering her thoughts and trying to find words for what she'd discovered. "Lucas, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully. Everything we thought we knew about this car, about why it ended up abandoned, about what happened to its owner, it's all connected to something much bigger and more dangerous than we imagined." She explained everything, taking her time to lay out each piece of evidence methodically. Jessica's connection to Marcus through their shared unit assignment. The unit patches that proved they had served together at the same forward operating base. The letters that revealed a conspiracy stretching from Afghan supply depots to corporate boardrooms in Washington. Lucas listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each detail, his coffee growing cold as the magnitude of what Sarah was telling him became clear. "So you're saying your sister and this Marcus guy were both killed because they found out about illegal weapons?" "Sales?" Lucas asked when Sarah finished, his voice hushed with the gravity of the revelation. "That's exactly what I'm saying. And Marcus hid evidence somewhere in this car before he died. Evidence that could expose the people responsible for their deaths and maybe prevent more soldiers from dying for someone else's profit. Lucas walked slowly around the Mustang, seeing it now with the same mixture of reverence and determination that Sarah felt. The car seemed different in the morning light, no longer just a collection of rusted metal and worn leather, but a time capsule containing secrets that powerful men had killed to protect. "This isn't just about restoration anymore, is it?" he said quietly. "No, this is about justice. About finishing what Jessica and Marcus started before they were silenced." Sarah pulled on her work gloves with new determination. "But I need to know you understand the risks. If Marcus was right and everything in that letter is true, we're dealing with people who have killed before and won't hesitate to kill again to protect their secrets." Lucas didn't hesitate for even a moment. "My dad always said that most important battles are the ones where good people refuse to look away when they see something wrong." Jessica was trying to help Marcus expose the truth. Now we finish what they started. The decision made, they began their search, methodically guided by Marcus's cryptic references to hidden secrets and the modifications Sarah had noticed during her initial assessment of the engine compartment. The additional wiring that served no obvious mechanical purpose proved to be the first significant clue. Following the carefully routed leads with a multimeter, they discovered that someone had created an elaborate electrical system designed not to power anything but to conceal something. The firewall modifications were far more extensive and sophisticated than Sarah had initially realized. What had appeared to be simple repair welding was actually an intricate concealment system designed by someone with both mechanical skill and paranoid attention to security. Behind what looked like a routine patch panel, Marcus had created a hidden compartment that would be virtually impossible to find without knowing exactly where to look. It took 3 hours of careful work to access the compartment without damaging whatever might be inside. Sarah had to remove parts of the dashboard, disconnect wiring harnesses, and carefully cut through welds that had been designed to look like factory work. Lucas assisted with the patience and attention to detail that his father had taught him, understanding that rushing could destroy evidence that had waited 15 years to be discovered. When they finally broke through to the hidden space, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Inside was a waterproof military document case, the kind designed to protect sensitive materials under the harshest combat conditions. Next to it lay a set of dog tags that clearly didn't bear Marcus's name, and a sealed envelope marked with a single word written in Marcus's careful handwriting: insurance. "Holy hell," Lucas whispered, his voice filled with awe and apprehension. He really did it. He hid evidence in his own car, right under everyone's noses, for 15 years. Sarah carefully removed the items with the reverence due to artifacts that represented the last testimony of murdered soldiers. The dog tags belonged to someone named Rodriguez Tommy A., with a date of birth that indicated he would have been roughly Jessica's age. The serial number and unit designation matched the same forward operating base where Jessica and Marcus had served. The envelope marked insurance contained photographs that made Sarah's blood run cold. Crystal clear images of American military weapons being loaded into unmarked civilian trucks by men who were obviously not regular military personnel. Shipping manifests with serial numbers that had been altered or falsified. Bills of lading showing weapons supposedly destroyed in combat operations actually being diverted to unknown recipients. Most damning of all were a series of photographs showing the aftermath of attacks where American weapons had clearly been used against American forces. RPGs, small arms, and improvised explosive devices that bore the unmistakable signatures of U.S. military ordnance turned against the very soldiers they had been meant to protect. "These weapons killed our own people," Sarah said quietly, her voice tight with controlled rage as she studied the photographic evidence. Someone was selling American military equipment to insurgents, and Jessica and Marcus found out about it. They were murdered to keep this secret. Lucas picked up one of the photographs, studying the faces of the men loading weapons with the intensity of someone trying to memorize details for future identification. "Any of these guys look familiar?" Sarah shook her head, but something about the operation visible in the images troubled her deeply. The level of organization was too sophisticated for a simple black market scheme. The access to military equipment, the systematic falsification of records, the careful coordination visible in the photographs, all pointed to something far more organized and well-connected than a few rogue soldiers selling surplus weapons. This wasn't some small-time operation run by corrupt sergeants, she realized aloud. This had to involve people with serious authority and connections, people who could manipulate official records, control military transport, and eliminate inconvenient witnesses without triggering investigations. The military document case proved even more revealing when they finally managed to access its contents. Inside were copies of official military transport manifests, financial records showing payments flowing to shell companies with deliberately obscure ownership structures, and a detailed log written in Marcus's meticulous handwriting documenting dates, locations, personnel, and equipment involved in what he had codenamed Operation Desert Wind. The log entries painted a picture of systematic corruption that had been operating for years before Marcus and Jessica stumbled onto it. Weapons shipments that officially never existed. Transport manifests that listed destroyed equipment actually being diverted to private buyers. Financial transactions routing millions of dollars through a network of shell companies to offshore accounts beyond the reach of American law enforcement. But it was the final document in the case that changed everything and confirmed Sarah's worst fears about what had really happened to her sister and Marcus. A partial transcript of an intercepted communication between someone identified only as Stone and a contact referred to as the Senator. The message was brief but devastating in its implications. Desert Wind compromise confirmed, Hayes and Collins asking too many questions about manifest discrepancies. Security assessment indicates immediate containment action required to prevent exposure. Recommend implementation of Protocol 7 for both subjects. Situation must be resolved within 72 hours to maintain operational security. The date stamp on the communication was March 18, 2009. 3 days before Marcus's helicopter crashed in what was officially described as a mechanical failure during routine operations. 1 day before Jessica's convoy was hit by an RPG that intelligence reports had described as unusually sophisticated for typical insurgent weapons. Sarah sank into a chair, the implications crashing over her like a physical blow. The evidence was undeniable. Both Jessica and Marcus had been systematically murdered by people within their own chain of command, killed by fellow Americans to protect a conspiracy that was generating massive profits from the blood of soldiers they had sworn to lead and protect. They were murdered, she said quietly, the words carrying the weight of 15 years of unanswered questions finally resolved into horrible clarity. Both of them. Someone with enough power to control military operations, to falsify records, to arrange convenient accidents, ordered their deaths to protect this conspiracy. "We need help," Lucas said quietly, his young face pale with the realization of what they had uncovered. "This is too big for us to handle alone. These people have killed before, and they'll kill again to protect themselves." Sarah nodded, understanding the magnitude of what they faced. But even as she reached for her phone to call someone, anyone who might be able to help them navigate this dangerous revelation, the familiar bell above the garage door chimed with its cheerful announcement of a visitor. Both Sarah and Lucas froze suddenly, acutely aware of how vulnerable they were with the explosive evidence spread across the workbench like pieces of a puzzle that could destroy powerful people. Sarah's first instinct was to sweep everything into hiding, but it was too late. Someone was already entering the garage. The woman who stepped through the door was professionally dressed in a way that suggested government employment, probably in her early 30s, with a confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority and complex decision-making. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style that spoke of efficiency over fashion, and her eyes held the kind of analytical sharpness that comes from years of examining classified documents and assessing security threats. "Miss Collins," the woman said, her voice carrying the slight formality of official business. "My name is Anna Kane. I understand you recently purchased a 1965 Mustang that belonged to Marcus Hayes." Sarah's defensive instincts kicked in immediately, her mind racing through possibilities. How had this woman known about the Mustang purchase? How had she connected it to Marcus Hayes? Most importantly, was she friend or enemy in the dangerous game they had suddenly found themselves playing? "How did you know that?" Sarah asked, carefully positioning herself between the visitor and the evidence on the workbench. Anna raised her hands in a peaceful gesture, clearly recognizing Sarah's suspicion and wanting to diffuse any tension before it escalated. "I've been looking for that car for a very long time, Miss Collins. Marcus Hayes was my cousin, and I believe he left something in it that could help me finally get justice for his death." Your cousin Sarah studied Anna's face carefully, looking for any family resemblance to the young soldier in the photographs they had found. There was something in the bone structure, a similarity around the eyes that suggested genetic connection, but Sarah remained cautious. My father's side of the family. Anna explained, taking a careful step closer but maintaining respectful distance. Marcus and I were close before his deployment. We grew up together, spent summers working on cars with our fathers. She gestured toward the evidence scattered across the workbench. I see you found what he hid. May I look at what you've discovered? Lucas moved protectively closer to Sarah, clearly uncomfortable with this unexpected visitor who seemed to know far too much about their activities. How do we know you're who you say you are? And how do we know this isn't some kind of trap? Anna reached slowly into her purse, telegraphing her movements to avoid startling them, and produced a Department of Defense identification card with her photograph and official credentials. Anna Kane, Senior Defense Analyst, Pentagon. I've been investigating my father's activities for the past 3 years, trying to gather enough evidence to expose his involvement in illegal weapons transactions. Your father, Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. Colonel Victor Kane. Anna's voice carried a weight of pain and determination that Sarah recognized immediately from her own experience with family loss and betrayal. The man Marcus codenamed Stone in his documentation. The man who ordered my cousin's death to protect his criminal enterprise. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow, though it also provided a crucial piece of the puzzle they were trying to solve. Anna Kane was the daughter of one of the conspirators, but rather than protecting her father, she was here trying to expose his crimes. The complexity of family loyalty versus moral obligation was something Sarah understood all too well, having wrestled with similar conflicts throughout her own life. Why should we trust you? Sarah asked carefully, her engineer's mind analyzing the situation from multiple angles. Your father is involved in this conspiracy. He's one of the people responsible for murdering Marcus and my sister Jessica. How do we know this isn't some elaborate get-up designed to identify and eliminate the remaining threats to their operation? Anna's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing the deep emotional cost of her situation. The careful control she maintained slipped just enough to show the pain beneath. Because the man my father killed wasn't just my cousin, she said quietly. Marcus was also the best friend of someone I loved deeply, someone I was planning to marry. Tommy Rodriguez. She pointed to the dog tags on the workbench, her voice growing stronger with conviction. Those belonged to the man I was supposed to spend my life with. Tommy died in the same series of attacks that killed your sister, asking the same dangerous questions about weapons manifests and equipment discrepancies. My father destroyed my future along with theirs, and I've spent 3 years gathering evidence to make him pay for what he's done. The pieces clicked into place for Sarah with the satisfying completeness of a complex mechanical problem finally solved. Rodriguez had been killed in the same coordinated operation that had claimed Jessica's life. Anna wasn't just seeking abstract justice for her cousin. She was fighting to expose the conspiracy that had personally destroyed her life and stolen her chance at happiness. Tommy died because he was asking the same questions as Marcus, and your sister Anna continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about her motivation. My father has spent 15 years covering up his crimes, building his career on the graves of American soldiers, getting promoted and decorated, while the families of his victims suffered in ignorance. I've spent the last 3 years documenting his activities from inside the Pentagon, gathering evidence of financial transactions, communication records, personnel decisions designed to silence inconvenient witnesses. What kind of evidence? Lucas asked, his suspicion beginning to give way to cautious interest as Anna's story proved consistent with what they had discovered. Anna produced a secure drive from her briefcase, handling it with the care due to something that represented years of dangerous work. Financial records showing payments from defense contractors to offshore accounts controlled by my father and his associates. Communication logs proving coordination between Pentagon officials and private military contractors. Personnel files showing how soldiers who asked inconvenient questions about equipment discrepancies were systematically transferred to the most dangerous assignments available. She looked directly at Sarah, her expression intense with purpose. Combined with what Marcus hid in this car, we might finally have enough evidence to expose the entire operation. But we need to move carefully and quickly. My father has resources and connections that reach into every level of government, and he's survived this long by eliminating threats before they can become dangerous to him. Sarah made a decision that would change the course of everything that followed. understanding that they had reached a point where inaction was as dangerous as action. What do you need from us? First, we need to document everything. Marcus hid create multiple secure copies and establish a chain of evidence that can't be suppressed or discredited. Anna said, already beginning to organize the materials with the professional efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. Second, we need to find a journalist who can't be bought, threatened, or silenced. Someone with the platform and credibility to make this story impossible to ignore once it goes public. I might know someone, Sarah said, thinking of a name Jessica had mentioned in one of her letters home. Alex Rivera, investigative journalist, specializing in military and government corruption. Jessica wrote about him once, said he was one of the few reporters who actually cared about what was happening to soldiers overseas rather than just writing stories that would advance his career. Anna nodded approvingly, clearly familiar with Rivera's reputation. Rivera's excellent. He's been trying to crack stories like this for years, building sources within the military and intelligence communities, but he's never had enough hard evidence to move against targets this highly placed and well-protected. With what we have now, combining Marcus's documentation with my inside intelligence, he might finally be able to break this conspiracy wide open. As they work together to catalog and secure the evidence, photographing documents, creating encrypted digital copies, and organizing materials for maximum impact, Sarah found herself studying Anna carefully. Here was a woman who had chosen truth over family loyalty, justice over personal safety, professional integrity over career advancement. It was a choice Sarah understood completely, having made a similar decision when she chose to investigate the Mustang's secrets, rather than simply restore it and ignore the larger implications. But Anna's presence also raised new questions that needed answers before Sarah could trust her completely. How long had Anna known about her father's criminal activities? What had initially driven her to investigate her own family? Most importantly, could she really be trusted when the stakes were this high and the consequences of betrayal could be measured in human lives? The answer came sooner than expected, providing both reassurance and a new level of urgency to their situation. As they finished documenting the last of Marcus's carefully preserved evidence, Anna's official Pentagon phone buzzed with an urgent message that made her face go pale as she read it. "We have a serious problem," she announced, showing them the message on her screen. "My father knows I've been in contact with you. He's ordering me to return to Washington immediately for what he's calling urgent family business that cannot be delayed." "That's not a request," Lucas observed grimly, reading the tone of military authority in the message. "No, it's definitely not." Anna began packing the evidence quickly and efficiently, her movements sharp with urgency. "He's trying to control the situation, probably calling me back so he can monitor my activities more closely and assess what I know about his operations. This accelerates our timeline significantly and puts all of us in immediate danger." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer and wasn't going to like it. "It means we're out of time for careful preparation and gradual evidence gathering." Anna met Sarah's eyes directly, her expression grave with the implications of their situation. "If my father suspects I've found Marcus's evidence cache and connected it to my own investigation, he'll take immediate action to eliminate all the potential threats to his operation. That includes you, Lucas, and anyone else who knows about Operation Desert Wind." The garage seemed to grow colder as the implications of Anna's words sank in. Sarah thought about Jessica's convoy, about Marcus's helicopter crash, about the systematic way inconvenient soldiers had been transferred to dangerous assignments or simply eliminated when they asked too many questions. Colonel Kane had killed before to protect his secrets and his profits. He wouldn't hesitate to kill again, especially now when his entire network was at risk of exposure. "So what's our strategy?" Sarah asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice, despite the fear that was coursing through her veins. "We contact Rivera, immediately arrange to transfer all the evidence tonight, and hope we can get the story published before my father realizes what's happening and moves to stop us." Anna's professional demeanor couldn't quite hide the fear that was clearly affecting her as well. "Once this story goes public, there's no going back for any of us. We'll all be targets until the justice system can protect us, assuming it's not too compromised to function properly." Sarah looked at Lucas, seeing her own determination reflected in his young face despite the obvious fear in his eyes. She thought about Jessica's courage in standing up to authority when she believed something was wrong, about the last letter her sister had never sent, about the promise to finish the Harley restoration together that would never be kept. Jessica would have done the same thing, Sarah said quietly. She would have stood up to power and corruption regardless of the personal cost, because that's what people with integrity do when they discover the truth. Then we do it tonight, Lucas said, his voice steady despite his youth and the magnitude of what they were facing. As they prepared for what might be the most dangerous night of their lives, Sarah felt the weight of history settling around her like a mantle of responsibility. 15 years after Jessica and Marcus had died trying to expose this conspiracy, their evidence was finally going to see daylight. The truth that had been buried with them was about to be resurrected, and with it perhaps some measure of justice for all the soldiers who had paid the ultimate price for someone else's greed and corruption. But first they had to survive long enough to tell the story and ensure that the evidence reached people who could act on it. Anna made the crucial call to Alex Rivera from a secure phone, her voice crisp and professional, as she explained the situation with the efficiency of someone accustomed to briefing high-level officials on complex security matters. Rivera's response was immediate and intense, exactly what they had hoped for. He had been waiting years for evidence this comprehensive and was willing to meet them that night at a location of his choosing, understanding the security implications and the need for absolute discretion. The rendezvous point Rivera selected was a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of anonymous truck stop where serious conversations could happen without attracting attention or creating records that could be traced later. Sarah and Lucas arrived first, taking a corner booth with clear sight lines to all entrances and exits, positioning themselves like soldiers preparing for a potentially dangerous operation. Anna arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a briefcase that contained copies of everything they had discovered, both Marcus's evidence and her own years of careful investigation. She moved with the controlled tension of someone who understood they were all now targets in a deadly game where the stakes were measured in human lives. Rivera was exactly what Sarah had expected from his byline photos. In Jessica's brief descriptions, intense, focused with the kind of restless energy that came from years of chasing difficult stories that powerful people didn't want told. He listened without interruption as Anna methodically presented the evidence, his expression growing more serious and determined with each revelation. "This is it," he said finally, his voice carrying the excitement of a journalist who had found the story of a lifetime. "This is the investigation that breaks the whole corrupt system wide open. Operation Desert Wind isn't just about illegal weapons sales. Based on what you've shown me, we're looking at a network of corruption that reaches from battlefield commanders to Pentagon officials to members of Congress. We're talking about billions of dollars in illegal profits built literally on the graves of American soldiers." "Can you publish it? Can you make sure the truth gets out before they can stop you?" Sarah asked, understanding that their lives now depended on Rivera's ability to get the story into the public eye before Colonel Kane could silence them permanently. Rivera nodded grimly, already planning his approach. "I can publish it, and I will. I have contacts at multiple major outlets, relationships built over years of credible reporting. But you need to understand what you're walking into. These people have killed to protect their secrets before, and they won't hesitate to kill again. Once this story breaks, you'll all be targets until the justice system can protect you, assuming enough of the system remains uncorrupted to function effectively. Then we'd better make sure the justice system gets the chance to work," Anna said quietly, her resolve hardening as she contemplated the confrontation with her father that was now inevitable. As they finalized their plans for publication, none of them noticed the black sedan that had been following Anna since she left the garage earlier that day. None of them saw the telephoto lens capturing their meeting from across the parking lot, documenting their faces and their interaction for analysis by people who had no intention of letting this conspiracy be exposed. And none of them realized that Colonel Victor Kane already knew exactly where his daughter was, what she was planning to do, and how he intended to stop her. The conspiracy that had claimed Jessica Collins and Marcus Hayes 15 years ago was about to claim new victims unless truth could triumph over power and corruption in time to save them. The restoration of Marcus's Mustang had uncovered far more than hidden evidence. It had awakened a sleeping giant of corruption and violence that would stop at nothing to protect itself and the billions of dollars in illegal profits it had generated over the years. Tomorrow would bring the most dangerous day of Sarah's life as the forces that had killed her sister finally turned their full attention to eliminating the last witnesses to their crimes. But tonight there was still hope that justice might finally be served and that the sacrifices of Jessica Collins and Marcus Hayes might not have been in vain. The black sedan had been following them since they left the diner, maintaining a professional distance that spoke of military training and surveillance expertise. Sarah noticed it first in her rearview mirror as they drove back toward town, the same vehicle that had been parked across from the truck stop when they'd met with Rivera. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as the implications became clear. "We've got company," she told Lucas and Anna quietly. "Black sedan been tailing us for the last 10 minutes. Anna turned carefully to look, her face going pale as she recognized the vehicle and its tactical positioning. "That's one of my father's operational units. Military contractors he uses for off-the-books activities that can't be traced back to official Pentagon operations." She pulled out her secure phone, checking for messages with growing alarm. "He's moved faster than I expected. This means he knows exactly what we've found and who we've talked to." The sedan made no attempt to close the distance or force a confrontation, content to simply track their movements and report their location to whoever was coordinating this operation. It was a psychological tactic Sarah recognized from her father's stories about his own military service during Vietnam, designed to create pressure and force mistakes through the constant awareness of being watched by hostile forces. "What's their strategy?" Lucas asked, his young voice steady despite the obvious tension radiating through the vehicle. "Information gathering first, then elimination when the tactical situation is optimal," Anna replied grimly, her Pentagon training evident in her clinical assessment of the threat they faced. "My father doesn't act impulsively or emotionally. He'll want to know exactly what evidence we have, who else might have copies, how many people we've contacted, and how to contain the situation with minimum exposure to his network and maximum plausible deniability." Sarah made a series of random turns through residential neighborhoods, confirming that they were indeed being actively followed by professionals who had no intention of losing their targets. The sedan maintained its distance but matched every maneuver with the precision of a well-trained surveillance team, making no effort to disguise its presence now that it had been spotted. "They're not trying to hide anymore?" Sarah observed, her mechanic's mind automatically analyzing the tactical situation the way she would diagnose a complex engine problem. "That's either arrogance or they're confident about how this situation ends." "It's confidence," Anna said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years spent studying her father's operational methods. "My father has been eliminating inconvenient people for 15 years without facing any meaningful consequences. He has protocols, resources, political connections, and enough institutional protection to operate with near impunity. The fact that they're showing themselves openly means they've moved to the final phase of containment and elimination." Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent encrypted message from Rivera. "Story goes live in 6 hours, multiple platforms simultaneously. Legal review complete. Nothing can stop publication now. Stay safe until dawn." The timestamp showed it was already past midnight, meaning sunrise would bring either salvation through public exposure or a final deadly confrontation with forces that had killed repeatedly to protect their secrets. "Rivera's publishing the story at sunrise," Sarah announced, feeling a mixture of hope and terror at the approaching deadline. 6 hours from now, this whole conspiracy goes public, whether Colonel Kane likes it or not. The evidence will be out there for the world to see. Anna's expression showed both relief and increased concern as she processed the implications. "That's excellent news for ultimate justice, but terrible news for our immediate survival prospects. My father will know he has a very narrow window to eliminate all the witnesses and then try to discredit the story as fabrications created by mentally unstable individuals who met unfortunate and tragic ends." The familiar streets of their small town looked different in the pre-dawn darkness, transformed by the knowledge that they were being hunted by professionals who had perfected the art of making problems disappear permanently. Every shadow could conceal a threat, every parked car could contain armed men, every intersection could become a kill zone if Colonel Kane decided the time for subtle surveillance had passed. The garage came into view as they rounded the final corner toward Collins Auto Repair, and Sarah felt a chill of premonition as she saw that lights were on inside the main bay. She had definitely turned everything off before leaving for their meeting with Rivera, following the habits of energy conservation her father had drilled into her throughout her childhood. Someone had been inside her family's business while they were gone. "Someone's been in the garage," she said, parking across the street rather than pulling directly into the lot where they would be more vulnerable to ambush. The main bay lights are on, and I know I shut everything down completely before we left for the diner. Professional search operation, most likely, Anna replied, studying the building with the analytical eye of someone trained in security assessment and threat evaluation. They'll have been conducting a systematic examination of the premises, looking for additional evidence, backup copies, hidden materials, anything that might compromise their operation beyond what we've already secured and documented. Lucas pointed to movement visible through the garage windows, silhouettes of at least two people moving with purpose through the workspace that had been Sarah's second home since childhood. There's still someone inside, at least two people moving around systematically searching through everything we left behind. Sarah felt a surge of anger at the violation of her father's workspace, the family business that represented 3 decades of honest labor and community service being contaminated by the presence of murderers and war profiteers. But underneath the anger was a more practical and immediate concern about what else Marcus Hayes might have hidden in the Mustang that they hadn't yet discovered. The engine block, she said, suddenly her mechanical knowledge suggesting possibilities they hadn't fully explored. We never finished searching it completely. When we pulled it out to access the firewall compartment, I noticed some modifications to the mounting points that didn't make sense. Marcus might have hidden additional evidence in places we haven't discovered yet. Anna nodded grimly, understanding the thoroughness that would be required to truly neutralize the threat they represented. That's exactly what they're looking for. My father is methodical and paranoid. He won't consider the threat eliminated until he's absolutely certain they found everything. Marcus had destroyed all copies of the evidence and permanently silenced everyone who knows about Operation Desert Wind. As if summoned by their conversation about him, Colonel Victor Kane himself emerged from the garage, and Sarah got her first direct look at the man who had ordered her sister's death 15 years ago. He was exactly what she had expected from Anna's descriptions and the glimpses she'd caught in official Pentagon photographs, tall, commanding, with the kind of natural authority that dominated any environment he entered. Even at this distance, and in the poor lighting of the street, his military bearing was unmistakable and intimidating. He was followed by 2 younger men in civilian clothes who moved with a controlled alertness and situational awareness that marked them as professional soldiers, probably Special Forces veterans who had transitioned into private military contracting. They carried themselves like people intimately familiar with violence, comfortable with weapons, and ready for immediate action if circumstances required lethal force. My father, Anna whispered, her voice carrying 15 years of accumulated pain, betrayal, and slowly growing understanding of what he had become. The man who killed Marcus, Tommy, your sister Jessica, and God knows how many other soldiers who asked inconvenient questions about weapons shipments and financial irregularities. Colonel Kane stood in the doorway of the garage for a long moment, scanning the street with the methodical attention to detail of someone conducting a professional security assessment. His gaze lingered on their vehicle, and Sarah had the distinctly uncomfortable feeling that he knew exactly who was watching him from across the street and was making tactical calculations about how to handle the situation. "He's seen us," Lucas observed quietly, his young voice tight with tension. "The question is, what does he plan to do about it?" The answer came with military efficiency and decisiveness. Kane spoke briefly to his 2 associates, gesturing with subtle hand signals that immediately sent them moving to flank the garage and establish tactical positions that would control the surrounding area. Kane himself began walking directly toward their car with the unhurried but purposeful stride of a man absolutely confident in his ability to control any situation through superior planning resources and willingness to use lethal force. "He's coming over here," Sarah said, her hand moving instinctively toward the gear shift as her mind raced through possible escape routes and tactical options. "Do we run now while we still have the chance?" No, Anna replied, her voice hardening, with a resolve that had been building for 3 years of careful investigation and evidence gathering. "I've been preparing for this direct confrontation with my father for too long to avoid it now. It's time to face him directly and let him know that his crimes are about to be exposed to the world regardless of what he does to us." But even as she spoke with determination, Sarah could see Anna's hands trembling slightly with the emotional weight of confronting the father who had destroyed so many lives while maintaining the facade of patriotic service and family loyalty. This wasn't just about justice for Marcus and Jessica and Tommy Rodriguez. It was about a daughter's final reckoning with a father who had chosen profit and power over every moral principle he had claimed to represent. Kane reached their car and tapped politely on Sarah's window with the casual confidence of someone who had never seriously doubted his ability to intimidate others into compliance through a combination of authority, implied threat, and carefully cultivated reputation for eliminating problems permanently. Sarah rolled down the window, maintaining direct eye contact with the man who had destroyed so many lives in pursuit of illegal profits. Miss Collins, I presume Kane said, his voice carrying the kind of command authority that expected immediate obedience and had been refined through decades of leading soldiers in life and death situations. I'm Colonel Victor Kane. I believe you have something that belongs to me, and I'm here to retrieve it before this situation escalates beyond what can be managed quietly. Your nephew's evidence cache doesn't belong to you, Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice despite the fear coursing through her veins. It belongs to the American people, to the families of the soldiers who died because of your illegal weapons sales, and it's going to be published in a few hours, whether you like it or not. Kane's expression didn't change visibly, but something cold and calculating flickered behind his eyes like a predator assessing prey. Evidence obtained through a legal search and seizure of private property, presented by unreliable sources with obvious mental health issues and personal vendettas, rarely survives proper legal scrutiny in federal court, especially when the primary witnesses are unfortunately unavailable for cross-examination due to tragic accidents or mental health crises. The threat was unmistakable, delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing routine administrative matters rather than multiple murders. Kane was telling them directly that he intended to kill them and then discredit their evidence as the fabricated ravings of disturbed individuals who had met convenient but unfortunate ends before they could be properly evaluated by qualified professionals. Hello, Father Anna said quietly, speaking for the first time since Kane had approached their vehicle, her voice steady despite the magnitude of this moment she had been preparing for during 3 years of secret investigation. Kane's carefully composed expression finally showed genuine surprise, though he recovered his professional demeanor within seconds. Anna, I've been trying to reach you through official channels. There are urgent family matters we need to discuss privately, away from unauthorized personnel who might misunderstand sensitive national security information. The family matter is your 15-year career as a war profiteer and mass murderer. Anna replied, her voice growing stronger as she finally spoke truths that had been building inside her for years. I know about Operation Desert Wind. I know about the systematic diversion of military weapons to unauthorized buyers. I know you killed Marcus and Tommy and Jessica Collins to protect your criminal conspiracy and your offshore bank accounts. Kane's mask of paternal concern slipped, completely revealing the cold calculation and ruthless pragmatism that had allowed him to orchestrate the deaths of American soldiers for personal profit. You don't understand the complexities of national security operations, Anna. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made to protect larger strategic interests that are beyond the comprehension of civilians and junior personnel. Larger interests like the millions of dollars you've deposited in Swiss and Cayman Islands accounts. Anna's professional composure finally cracked, completely releasing years of suppressed anger, disappointment, and moral outrage. Like the fortune you have built by selling American weapons to insurgents who used them to kill the soldiers you swore an oath to protect and lead. The conversation was interrupted by Lucas, who had been watching Kane's associates during the intense family confrontation and had noticed their tactical movements. They're moving to surround us systematically, both flanks using cover and concealment to get into positions where they can prevent our escape and control the engagement area. Sarah looked around and confirmed that Kane's men had indeed positioned themselves with military precision to prevent easy escape, using parked cars, building corners, and natural terrain features to approach without being easily detected or engaged. It was a classic small unit tactical maneuver designed to control the battlefield and eliminate options for the opposing force while maintaining maximum flexibility for the attacking elements. Kane stepped back from the car slightly, his demeanor shifting seamlessly from false paternal concern to the command authority of a field-grade officer directing a tactical operation. You've caused considerable disruption to important national security operations, Ms. Collins. That disruption represents a clear and present danger to ongoing missions and personnel safety. Such threats must be contained and neutralized before they can cause irreparable damage to critical interests. The only damage will be to your criminal enterprise "And your ability to profit from the deaths of American soldiers," Sarah replied, starting the car's engine and preparing for immediate tactical movement. "But I guess protecting your Swiss bank accounts is what you're really worried about, not national security." Kane made a subtle hand gesture to his men, a signal that Sarah recognized from her father's military stories as a command to close in and engage targets. His associates immediately began moving more aggressively, abandoning concealment in favor of speed as they attempted to reach positions where they could disable the vehicle and capture its occupants. Sarah threw the car into reverse and accelerated rapidly backward, forcing Kane to jump aside quickly to avoid being struck as she maneuvered away from the tactical trap his men had been methodically setting around them. The sudden movement caught his associates off guard, disrupting their coordinated approach and creating the opening she needed to escape the immediate kill zone. The black sedan that had been following them immediately roared to life with the deep rumble of a high-performance engine beginning pursuit, along with a second vehicle that had been concealed in the shadows nearby, probably serving as backup and command element for Kane's operation. Sarah pushed her truck to its mechanical limits through the empty pre-dawn streets, using her intimate knowledge of the local area to navigate shortcuts, back alleys, and side streets that might give them a temporary advantage over their better-equipped pursuers. "Where are we going?" Lucas asked, gripping the dashboard as Sarah took a sharp turn at dangerous speed, the truck's tires protesting against the demands being placed on them. "Somewhere public with witnesses and security cameras," Anna replied, already working her secure Pentagon phone to contact potential allies and support elements. "Somewhere they can't simply eliminate us without creating exactly the kind of public attention and official investigation they're desperately trying to avoid." Sarah's mind raced through the limited options available in their small town at 3 o'clock in the morning. Most businesses were closed and empty, offering few opportunities for the public safety that witnesses and documentation might provide. But there was one location that maintained 24-hour operations and would have both comprehensive security camera coverage and night shift personnel who could serve as independent witnesses to whatever happened next. The hospital, she announced, taking a hard left turn toward the medical center while checking her mirrors to assess their pursuers' positions. Emergency room never closes comprehensive security system and staff members who definitely don't work for Colonel Kane or his criminal network. Behind them, the pursuit vehicles were steadily gaining ground, their more powerful engines and professionally trained drivers beginning to overcome Sarah's advantage in local knowledge and desperate motivation. She could see the lead sedan positioning itself for a tactical maneuver designed to force them off the road without causing the kind of spectacular accident that might attract unwanted attention from emergency responders and law enforcement. "They're trying to execute a controlled vehicle interdiction," Lucas observed, watching the choreographed movements of their pursuers with growing understanding of military tactics. "They want to disable our transportation without killing us immediately." Standard operating procedure for this type of operation, Anna confirmed grimly, her Pentagon training allowing her to analyze their tactical situation with professional detachment, despite the personal terror of being hunted by her own father. "They need to determine exactly what evidence we've secured, who else has copies, and how many people know about Desert Wind before they can safely eliminate us and close this security breach permanently." The hospital complex came into view ahead of them, its emergency room entrance brightly lit and welcoming in the pre-dawn darkness, like a beacon of safety in an increasingly dangerous situation. Sarah accelerated toward the ambulance bay, knowing that the presence of medical personnel, security guards, and comprehensive camera coverage would force Kane's men to reconsider their immediate tactical options and possibly withdraw to reassess the situation. She brought the truck to a controlled but dramatic halt directly in front of the emergency room doors, positioning the vehicle where the sudden arrival of people in obvious distress would immediately attract attention from hospital security personnel and medical staff. The pursuit cars slowed as they approached the well-lit, well-monitored hospital grounds, clearly reluctant to continue their aggressive tactics in such a public and documented environment. Out of the car now, Anna directed, understanding that their temporary safety depended entirely on being surrounded by independent witnesses who could document and report whatever happened next. "We need to get inside where there are cameras, security personnel, and people who can call for help if this situation escalates further." They rushed toward the emergency room entrance, where the night receptionist was already looking up in concern at the dramatic arrival of vehicles and people who were clearly in some kind of distress. Behind them, Kane's men had stopped their vehicles at the edge of the hospital property, but remained inside, clearly reluctant to continue their pursuit operation in such a heavily monitored and populated location. Inside the hospital's brightly lit emergency room, Sarah immediately used the secure phone Rivera had provided to confirm that the publication schedule remained on track, despite the night's dangerous developments. His response was immediate and reassuring. Everything was prepared according to plan. Multiple major outlets had confirmed their cooperation. Legal review had been completed, and absolutely nothing could prevent the truth from being published in less than 4 hours. But their moment of relative safety was clearly temporary and fragile. Through the emergency room windows, they could see Kane's vehicles maintaining surveillance positions around the hospital perimeter, with additional cars arriving to establish a comprehensive containment perimeter. The colonel was obviously preparing for a more extended confrontation, waiting patiently for an opportunity to complete his mission without generating the kind of public attention and official investigation that might compromise his network and expose his crimes. Anna used her official Pentagon credentials and security clearance to convince hospital security to contact local law enforcement, though she carefully warned Sarah and Lucas that Kane's influence and connections might extend deep into local police departments as well. They would need to be extremely careful about who they trusted with sensitive information and how much they revealed before the story broke publicly and provided them with some protection through exposure. As they waited in the hospital's secure environment, Anna's phone buzzed with an urgent call from an encrypted number she immediately recognized. "It's someone from my network inside the Pentagon," she explained, accepting the call with obvious relief at having contact with potential allies. The conversation was brief but intense, conducted in the careful coded language of intelligence professionals discussing sensitive operations. When Anna ended the call, her expression showed both hope and renewed urgency about their situation and the larger implications of what they had uncovered. That was a contact inside Pentagon intelligence who's been monitoring communications related to Desert Wind, she explained to Sarah and Lucas. "He's detected significant activity in the past few hours, communications suggesting that my father is preparing to activate what they call Protocol 7, which appears to be a comprehensive elimination and cover-up operation designed to remove all evidence and witnesses related to the weapons trafficking conspiracy." "What does that mean for us, specifically?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already understood the implications and wouldn't like the answer. "It means my father has moved beyond trying to contain this quietly," Anna replied grimly. "Protocol 7 involves eliminating all security threats regardless of collateral damage or public exposure. He's apparently decided that the risk of discovery has become so high that he's willing to accept significant operational exposure in order to permanently silence everyone who knows about Desert Wind." The hospital's peaceful nighttime atmosphere was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of additional vehicles outside black SUVs and sedans with government plates that were positioning themselves around the medical center's perimeter. Through the windows, Sarah could see armed men in tactical gear taking positions that would control all exits from the building. "He's escalating to a full tactical operation." Lucas observed, his voice tight with fear, as he recognized the signs of a military-style assault being prepared outside their temporary sanctuary. Anna was already working her secure communications, trying to contact allies within the intelligence community who might be able to intervene or provide assistance. But the responses she was receiving were clearly not encouraging, and her expression grew increasingly grim as she processed the information coming through encrypted channels. "My Pentagon contacts are being systematically cut off from communications and restricted from their normal duties," she reported with growing alarm. "Someone with very high-level authority is implementing what appears to be a comprehensive security lockdown related to Desert Wind. Anyone who might be in a position to help us is being neutralized or isolated." Just then, the hospital's main entrance opened, and Sarah felt a surge of unexpected hope as she recognized a familiar figure entering the emergency room. David Hayes Marcus's father walked through the doors with the determined stride of a man who had finally decided to take direct action after years of patient investigation and evidence gathering. "Mr. Hayes," Sarah called out in relief, rising to meet the older man who had started this entire journey by arranging for her to purchase his son's Mustang. "What are you doing here? How did you find us?" David's expression was grim but resolute as he approached their small group, carrying a briefcase that suggested he had come prepared for this confrontation. "I've been monitoring police communications and tracking the movements of people connected to my son's case," he explained. "When I detected activity around your garage and realized Colonel Kane was making his move, I knew it was time to stop hiding and start fighting back directly." He looked directly at Anna, recognition flickering in his eyes. "You must be Anna Kane. Marcus wrote about you in his private journals, said you were asking the right questions about your father's activities even before his deployment. I've been hoping for years that you would eventually find the courage to act on your suspicions." Anna nodded, understanding that David Hayes represented the kind of ally they desperately needed. Someone with intimate knowledge of the case, personal motivation for seeking justice, and resources that might help them survive the next few hours until the story could be published and provide them with some protection through public exposure. "Mr. Hayes, I need you to know that we've found Marcus's evidence cache," Anna said quickly. "Everything he documented about Desert Wind, all the proof of the weapons trafficking and the murders committed to cover it up. A journalist named Rivera is publishing the complete story at sunrise just a few hours from now." David's expression showed a mixture of vindication and renewed determination. After 15 years of being dismissed as a grief-stricken father chasing conspiracy theories, he was finally seeing the truth his son had died to expose being brought into the light. But his response surprised Sarah with his practicality and strategic thinking. "That's excellent news for ultimate justice, but terrible news for our immediate survival," he said, unconsciously echoing Anna's earlier assessment. "Kane will know he has a very narrow window to eliminate all the evidence and witnesses before this goes public. He'll use every resource at his disposal to prevent publication, including full tactical assault on this hospital if necessary." David opened his briefcase and revealed its contents: detailed surveillance photographs, financial records, communication intercepts, and what appeared to be official government documents with high security classifications. The scope and quality of the materials immediately caught Anna's attention. "You've been conducting your own investigation all these years," she said with growing respect for the older man's dedication and capabilities. "This is professional-level intelligence gathering and analysis." 15 years of careful work, David confirmed. "I may not have had official resources or security clearances, but I had something Kane never expected: a father's determination to find the truth about his son's death and the patience to build a case systematically over more than a decade. I've identified every member of his network, documented the financial flows, and gathered evidence that corroborates everything Marcus found." He spread some of the documents on a nearby table, revealing the scope of his investigation. Bank records showing millions of dollars flowing to offshore accounts controlled by Kane and his associates. Communication intercepts proving coordination between Pentagon officials and private military contractors. Personnel files demonstrating how soldiers who asked inconvenient questions were systematically transferred to dangerous assignments or eliminated through arranged accidents. But most significantly, David had obtained classified documents proving that Kane's operation extended far beyond simple weapons trafficking. Desert Wind was connected to a network of defense contractors, private military companies, and congressional officials who had been systematically looting military resources for personal profit, while American soldiers died using substandard equipment and facing enemies armed with diverted American weapons. "This is bigger than we realized," Anna said, studying David's evidence with professional amazement. "My father isn't just running a weapons trafficking operation. He's part of a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of government and defense contracting. We're looking at billions of dollars in theft and hundreds of deaths that could have been prevented." The revelation of the true scope of the conspiracy was interrupted by a new development outside the hospital. Additional government vehicles were arriving, including what appeared to be federal law enforcement units that might represent either rescue or additional threat, depending on whether they were legitimate agents or part of Kane's network. David studied the new arrivals through the window with the analytical eye of someone who had spent years learning to identify different types of government operations. "Those are FBI tactical units," he announced with cautious optimism. "Real federal agents, not private contractors or Kane's people. Someone in Washington must have decided to intervene directly." Anna was already using her Pentagon credentials to attempt contact with the FBI units, hoping to establish communication with law enforcement officials who might be operating independently of Kane's influence. But the response she received was mixed. Some agents were legitimate federal investigators, but others appeared to be working under orders that might have been influenced by Kane's high-level connections. "We have both friends and enemies out there," she reported grimly. "Some of those agents are here to help us, but others may have been told we're dangerous criminals or national security threats." Kane's influence reaches deep into the federal law enforcement community. The situation was reaching a critical point where multiple forces were converging on the hospital. Kane's tactical teams, legitimate federal investigators, possibly corrupt law enforcement officials, and an approaching deadline for publication that would change everything if they could survive long enough to see it happen. David made a decision that would determine the outcome of the next few hours. "I'm going outside to talk to the FBI directly," he announced, gathering his evidence briefcase. "I've been preparing for this moment for 15 years. It's time to trust the system to work properly when presented with undeniable evidence of corruption and murder." As dawn approached and the countdown to publication continued, Sarah found herself at the center of a confrontation that would determine not just their survival, but whether 15 years of carefully hidden crimes would finally be exposed to justice. The restoration of Marcus Hayes's Mustang had indeed uncovered far more than hidden evidence. It had awakened a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military and political power, and that conspiracy was now fighting desperately to protect itself. Outside the hospital, forces were gathering for what might be the final battle between truth and corruption, between justice and the kind of power that had operated with impunity for too long. The next few hours would determine whether the sacrifices of Jessica Collins, Marcus Hayes, Tommy Rodriguez, and countless other soldiers would finally be vindicated, or whether their deaths would remain just another successfully covered-up crime in the long history of institutional corruption. But inside the hospital, surrounded by the evidence that would change everything, Sarah Collins prepared to see justice finally served for her sister and all the others who had died trying to do what was right. David Hayes stepped through the hospital's automatic doors into the pre-dawn air, carrying his briefcase of evidence with the resolute stride of a man who had spent 15 years preparing for this exact moment. The FBI tactical units had positioned themselves in a professional perimeter around the building, their presence both reassuring and ominous as David approached the apparent command element, with his hands clearly visible and non-threatening. Agent Patricia Reeves, FBI Counterintelligence Division. The lead agent introduced herself, showing her credentials while maintaining the cautious alertness of someone operating in a potentially hostile environment. "We've received conflicting reports about the situation here. We need to establish exactly what's happening and who represents legitimate authority in this matter." David opened his briefcase, carefully revealing the comprehensive documentation he had assembled over 15 years of patient investigation. "Agent Reeves, I'm David Hayes, and this evidence proves a conspiracy involving illegal weapons trafficking, multiple murders and corruption reaching the highest levels of military command. My son Marcus was killed 15 years ago for discovering this operation, and Colonel Victor Kane has been eliminating witnesses ever since." Agent Reeves examined the documents with professional efficiency, her expression growing increasingly serious as she recognized the quality and implications of David's evidence. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Sarah watched through the windows as the confrontation outside developed in ways that could determine their survival. Anna was monitoring encrypted communications on her secure Pentagon device, receiving updates from her network of contacts within the intelligence community. The situation in Washington was chaotic, with competing factions within different agencies receiving conflicting orders about how to handle what was being described variously as a national security crisis, a criminal investigation, or a terrorist incident. "My contacts inside the Pentagon are reporting a complete communications lockdown on anything related to Desert Wind," Anna informed Sarah and Lucas. "Someone with extraordinary authority has classified the entire matter at levels that restrict access to only the most senior officials. But that same classification might be what saves us, because it means the legitimate agents out there are operating without full information about Kane's involvement." Lucas had positioned himself near the emergency room's secondary exit, maintaining watch on Kane's tactical units that were still positioned around the hospital perimeter. "They haven't moved closer since the FBI arrived, but they're not withdrawing either. It's like they're waiting for something specific to happen." The answer came through Anna's secure communications. Rivera's publication deadline had been moved up by 2 hours due to security concerns. The story would break at 4 a.m. rather than 6 a.m., which was now less than 30 minutes away. Multiple news organizations were coordinating simultaneous release across digital platforms, print, media, and broadcast networks to ensure maximum impact and prevent suppression. Rivera moved up the timeline, Sarah announced, with mixed relief and increased tension. The story goes public in 25 minutes. If we can survive that long, the whole conspiracy becomes public knowledge, and Kane loses his ability to cover this up quietly. But Anna's expression showed growing concern as she processed additional intelligence from her Pentagon contacts. My father has apparently activated what his network calls the final protocol, she reported grimly. According to the intercepts my contacts are monitoring, he's been authorized to use any means necessary to prevent publication, including direct action against news organizations and their sources. The implications were staggering. Kane wasn't just planning to eliminate the witnesses, he was preparing to attack the journalists and publishers who were about to expose his crimes. The conspiracy had grown so powerful and desperate that it was willing to assault the free press directly rather than allow the truth to emerge. David's conversation with the FBI was clearly intensifying, with additional agents joining the discussion as the scope of his evidence became apparent. Through the window, Sarah could see Agent Reeves speaking urgently into her radio, while examining documents that were clearly causing significant alarm within the federal law enforcement command structure. The breakthrough came when Anna received an encrypted message that changed everything. General Patricia Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had been secretly monitoring Kane's activities through her own intelligence network and was preparing to intervene directly. The message was brief but decisive. Evidence confirmed, federal support authorized. Prepare for immediate extraction and protection. That's General Hayes, Anna explained with obvious relief. She's been investigating corruption within the Pentagon for years, building cases against officers like my father who've been betraying their oaths for personal profit. If she's intervening directly, it means we have support at the highest levels of military command. But Kane's response was swift and desperate. Through the hospital windows, they could see his tactical units beginning to move closer, abandoning their previous restraint as the deadline for publication approached. The black SUVs were advancing toward the hospital entrance while maintaining formations that suggested they were prepared to engage federal agents if necessary. He's making his final play, Sarah observed, watching the tactical movements with growing alarm. He knows he's running out of time, so he's risking everything on one last attempt to silence us before the story breaks. The hospital's emergency room suddenly filled with tension as everyone inside recognized that the standoff outside was escalating toward violence. Medical staff began implementing security protocols while maintaining their professional obligations to provide care regardless of the circumstances. The night supervisor approached Sarah's group with obvious concern. Ma'am, we need to know if you and your friends are in immediate danger because we have protocols for protecting patients and staff during security emergencies, the supervisor said with the calm professionalism that medical personnel maintain during crisis situations. Anna showed her Pentagon credentials to the supervisor, explaining briefly that they were federal witnesses in a national security investigation and that the FBI agents outside were there to provide protection. The supervisor immediately activated the hospital's emergency security procedures, which included locking down non-essential areas and establishing communication with law enforcement. The situation outside reached a critical point when Kane himself emerged from one of the SUVs and began walking directly toward the FBI perimeter. His approach was confident and authoritative, the bearing of a senior military officer accustomed to having his orders obeyed without question by federal law enforcement personnel who might not understand the full scope of his authority and connections. Agent Reeves positioned herself to intercept Kane while maintaining tactical awareness of his support elements. The conversation between them was too distant to hear clearly, but their body language suggested an intense discussion about jurisdiction authority and conflicting orders from different federal agencies. David remained near the FBI command position, his evidence briefcase open and his documentation being rapidly copied and transmitted to federal investigators in Washington. His 15 years of patient work were finally being validated by professional law enforcement officials who had the authority and resources to act on what he had discovered. Inside the hospital, Anna received another encrypted update that provided crucial tactical intelligence. General Hayes had dispatched a military helicopter with a specialized extraction team that would arrive within minutes. The plan was to remove Anna Sarah Lucas and David to a secure military facility where they could provide testimony while being protected from Kane's network. But Kane had apparently anticipated this possibility. His tactical units were repositioning to control the hospital's helicopter landing area, preparing to prevent any extraction attempt through superior firepower and tactical positioning. The confrontation was escalating toward the kind of direct military engagement that Kane had been trying to avoid but was now apparently willing to accept. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the pre-dawn air, but instead of one extraction, multiple aircraft were converging on the hospital from different directions. Some were clearly military with the distinctive sound signatures of armed reconnaissance helicopters, while others appeared to be law enforcement aircraft with searchlights and tactical capabilities. "It's General Hayes," Anna announced, as she recognized the aircraft formations through her Pentagon communications. "She's not just sending an extraction team. She's deploying a full tactical response to contain my father and his network. This is happening at the highest levels of military command." Through the hospital windows, the scene outside resembled a military operation more than a law enforcement incident. Federal agents, military personnel, and Kane's private contractors were positioning themselves for what appeared to be an inevitable confrontation over who had legitimate authority in this situation. The publication deadline was now less than 10 minutes away, and Sarah could feel the tension building as everyone involved understood that the next few minutes would determine whether 15 years of carefully hidden crimes would finally be exposed to public scrutiny. Rivera sent a final update confirming that nothing could prevent publication. At this point, the stories were loaded into automated systems across multiple platforms. Legal review had been completed, and the evidence would be released simultaneously across dozens of news organizations, regardless of what happened to the sources or witnesses. "It's done," Sarah announced with profound relief. "In 8 minutes, the whole world will know about Desert Wind Kane's crimes and everything our investigation uncovered. The truth is finally going to see daylight." But Kane's desperation had reached levels that made him willing to risk everything on preventing those 8 minutes from passing peacefully. His tactical units were advancing toward the hospital entrance in formations that suggested they were prepared to engage federal agents and military personnel to reach their targets. The confrontation erupted when Kane himself approached the FBI perimeter with obvious intent to enter the hospital and eliminate the witnesses personally. Agent Reeves moved to intercept him, clearly operating under orders to prevent any unauthorized access to the federal witnesses inside the building. "Colonel Kane, you are ordered to stand down and submit to federal custody for questioning in connection with ongoing criminal investigations," Agent Reeves announced with the authority of federal law enforcement, backed by military command. Kane's response was swift and desperate. He signaled his tactical units to advance, while simultaneously drawing his sidearm in a direct threat against federal agents. The situation had finally escalated beyond any possibility of quiet resolution or plausible deniability. The next few minutes unfolded with the rapid intensity of professional tactical operations. Kane's contractors engaged FBI agents while military helicopters landed on the hospital grounds, deploying specialized extraction teams under General Hayes' direct authority. The sound of gunfire and tactical communications filled the pre-dawn air as competing forces fought for control of the situation. Inside the hospital, Sarah and her allies were quickly surrounded by military personnel wearing the insignia of General Hayes' personal security detail. These weren't ordinary soldiers, but elite special operations personnel whose mission was to extract high-value witnesses and ensure their testimony reached appropriate authorities. "Ma'am, we're here to provide immediate protection and transport to a secure facility," the team leader announced to Anna, clearly recognizing her Pentagon credentials and understanding her significance to the larger investigation. But even as they prepared for extraction, Sarah insisted on maintaining contact with Rivera to ensure the publication deadline was met successfully. His final message was triumphant. The stories had been released exactly on schedule across every major news platform, and the evidence was now in the public domain where no amount of influence or intimidation could suppress it. "It's published," Sarah announced as they moved toward the extraction helicopters. The whole conspiracy, Kane's crimes, the murders, the weapons trafficking, everything is now public knowledge. 15 years of silence has finally been broken. The extraction was conducted with military precision, with Sarah Anna Lucas and David being transported to separate, secure facilities where they could provide detailed testimony while being protected from any remaining elements of Kane's network. As their helicopter lifted off from the hospital grounds, Sarah could see the tactical situation below being resolved by federal and military authorities working in coordination. Kane himself had been taken into custody by FBI agents, his network of contractors either captured or neutralized, and the conspiracy that had operated with impunity for 15 years was finally being dismantled by legitimate law enforcement and military authorities. But the most important victory was the publication of the truth. Rivera's investigation, supported by Marcus's evidence, and David's 15 years of patient work, was dominating every news cycle and forcing immediate congressional investigations into Pentagon operations and defense contractor oversight. The restoration of Marcus Hayes's Mustang had achieved everything he had hoped when he hid that evidence 15 years ago. Justice was finally being served for Jessica Collins, Marcus Hayes, Tommy Rodriguez, and all the other soldiers whose deaths had been covered up to protect illegal profits. As dawn broke over the landscape below, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The promise she had made to David Hayes about doing right by his son's car had been fulfilled in ways she had never imagined when she first saw that $600 Mustang in a dusty barn. The truth was finally free. The criminals were in custody, and the conspiracy that had claimed so many lives was being exposed to the justice it had evaded for too long. Some legacies, Sarah realized, were indeed too important to remain buried forever. The Mustang had delivered its final message, carrying the truth across 15 years, from a soldier who refused to be silenced to a mechanic who refused to look away. Justice had finally been served, and the restoration was complete in every way that mattered. From her secure facility, Sarah would spend the next several months providing testimony that would lead to the prosecution and conviction of dozens of conspirators, the recovery of hundreds of millions in stolen funds, and reforms that would prevent similar corruption in the future. But she would always remember that it had started with a $600 car and a promise to do right by a dead soldier's legacy. Some promises, she had learned, were worth any price to keep. 6 months after the headlines had dominated every major news outlet and Colonel Victor Kane had been sentenced to life in federal prison, Sarah Collins stood in the brand-new Hayes Collins Memorial Garage watching sunlight stream through spotless windows onto a completely restored 1965 Ford Mustang that gleamed like liquid fire in the morning light. The car was exactly as Marcus Hayes had envisioned it would be when he returned from Afghanistan, but it had taken 15 years and a journey through conspiracy, betrayal, and justice to reach this moment. Every chrome surface reflected the care that had gone into its resurrection. Every mechanical system had been rebuilt to exceed original specifications, and every detail honored both the young soldier who had owned it and the mechanic who had saved it from abandonment. Lucas Martinez, now 20, and the garage's full partner, rather than just an apprentice, ran his hand along the Mustang's perfect paint job with the reverence due to something that had changed all their lives in ways they were still discovering. The insurance settlement from Collins Auto Repair's destruction had been substantial, but the real foundation for their new business had come from an unexpected source. The Department of Justice's asset forfeiture proceedings against Kane's network had recovered over $400 million in illegal profits from 15 years of weapons trafficking. A significant portion of those recovered funds had been designated for a victim compensation program that included not just the families of murdered soldiers, but also civilians who had been harmed while exposing the conspiracy. Sarah's settlement had been generous enough to build the new garage from the ground up, incorporating every modern technology and safety feature she had ever dreamed of having. But more importantly, it had allowed her to establish the facility as a memorial to her sister Jessica, to Marcus Hayes, and to all the other soldiers whose deaths had been covered up to protect criminal profits. The memorial aspect was more than symbolic. The garage served as a training facility for veterans transitioning to civilian careers, providing free automotive education to former soldiers who were seeking new skills and purposes after their military service. It was exactly the kind of legacy Sarah believed her sister would have wanted, helping fellow veterans build new lives while honoring those who hadn't come home. David Hayes had become a regular presence at the garage, officially serving as a historical advisor, but actually functioning as something like a grandfather figure to the younger veterans who came there for training. His 15 years of investigation had finally been vindicated in the most complete way possible, and he had found peace in seeing his son's sacrifice transformed into something that helped living soldiers rather than just commemorating dead ones. Anna Kane had made a different but equally significant choice. After testifying in dozens of criminal trials and congressional hearings, she had resigned from her Pentagon position and accepted an appointment as Inspector General for Veterans Affairs, where she was implementing reforms designed to prevent the kind of systematic corruption that had claimed so many lives. Her relationship with Sarah had evolved into something deeper than shared trauma or mutual purpose. They had discovered a genuine friendship built on respect, trust, and the understanding that some experiences create bonds that transcend ordinary social connections. Anna visited the garage regularly, not just to check on its memorial function, but because she had found in Sarah someone who understood the price of choosing truth over comfort. But this particular morning was special for reasons beyond the memorial garage's continuing success or the ongoing satisfaction of seeing justice served. This was the morning Sarah had been anticipating for months, when a very specific visitor would arrive to see the completed restoration and understand how his careful planning had finally achieved its intended purpose. The sound of a motorcycle engine announced the arrival exactly on schedule, and Sarah smiled as she recognized the distinctive rumble of a perfectly tuned Harley-Davidson approaching the garage. The rider who dismounted and removed his helmet was someone she had never expected to meet, but whose identity had been revealed during the complex legal proceedings that followed Kane's arrest. Alex Rivera, the investigative journalist whose reporting had broken the story worldwide, approached the garage with the slightly hesitant manner of someone who had spent months researching people he was now meeting in person for the first time. His Pulitzer Prize for the Desert Wind investigation had been well-deserved, but Sarah knew that he considered the real reward to be the justice that had finally been served for the soldiers who had died protecting the truth. Miss Collins, Rivera said, extending his hand in greeting. I wanted to see the car that started this whole journey and meet the mechanic who refused to let sleeping secrets lie buried. Sarah accepted his handshake, appreciating the genuine respect in his voice. She had read every word of his extensive reporting on the Desert Wind conspiracy, and she understood that his commitment to the story had been motivated by the same sense of justice that had driven her own investigation. It's beautiful work, Rivera said, walking around the Mustang, with obvious appreciation for the craftsmanship that had gone into its restoration. Marcus would be proud to see it like this, exactly as he had planned it would look when he got home from deployment. But Rivera's visit wasn't just about seeing the completed car or meeting the people who had made his reporting possible. He had information that would complete the story in ways that none of them had anticipated, revelations that had emerged during his continued investigation into the ramifications of the Desert Wind exposure. There's something you should know about Marcus's planning, Rivera said, producing a secure briefcase that looked remarkably similar to the one David had carried during their confrontation at the hospital. During my investigation into Kane's network, I discovered that Marcus had made contingency arrangements that went far beyond just hiding evidence in his car. He opened the briefcase to reveal documents that immediately caught Anna's attention with their official Pentagon classifications and security markings. These were materials that should have been accessible only to the highest levels of military intelligence, yet Rivera had clearly obtained them through legitimate journalistic channels. Marcus established what he called a legacy protocol. Rivera explained, spreading the documents on the garage's main workbench. If his evidence was ever discovered and acted upon successfully, it would trigger the release of additional information that he had secured through other channels and other people he had recruited to his investigation. The documents revealed that Marcus Hayes had been far more than just an individual soldier who had stumbled onto evidence of corruption. He had been systematically building a network of military personnel who were documenting various forms of institutional corruption, creating what amounted to a shadow intelligence operation focused on internal threats to military integrity. Jessica Collins had been part of that network. Rivera continued showing them communication records that proved Sarah's sister had been actively involved in documenting weapons irregularities for months before her death. She wasn't just trying to help Marcus expose Desert Wind. She was conducting her own parallel investigation into supply chain corruption that affected multiple forward operating bases. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow, but it was a positive shock rather than traumatic news. Her sister hadn't just been an innocent victim who had died for asking inconvenient questions. Jessica had been a deliberate and informed participant in an investigation that she had understood was dangerous but necessary for protecting other soldiers. Tommy Rodriguez had been part of the same network Anna realized studying the communications that showed her deceased fiancé coordinating with both Marcus and Jessica to document evidence from multiple sources. He wasn't just asking random questions about manifest discrepancies. He was systematically gathering information as part of a coordinated intelligence operation. Rivera nodded, confirming Anna's understanding. The legacy protocol that Marcus established was designed to ensure that if anything happened to the primary investigators, their work would continue through other people they had recruited and trained. Your sister Sarah and Tommy and Marcus weren't just individual heroes. They were part of an organized effort to protect military integrity from internal corruption. But the most significant revelation was still to come. Rivera produced a final set of documents that bore official seals from the Department of Defense and classifications that indicated they had been released through the highest levels of Pentagon authority. General Patricia Hayes has officially declassified these materials as part of the ongoing reforms that have resulted from the Desert Wind investigation, Rivera explained. She wanted you to understand the full scope of what Marcus accomplished and why his sacrifice ultimately protected thousands of soldiers who will never know his name. The documents detailed the complete extent of the weapons trafficking conspiracy, showing that Kane's network had been systematically diverting military equipment worth billions of dollars while simultaneously providing substandard equipment to American forces. The financial analysis proved that Kane's crimes had directly contributed to the deaths of over 300 American soldiers and countless Allied personnel who had been forced to operate with compromised equipment. But Marcus's investigation had identified the corruption early enough to prevent even greater losses. His evidence had allowed General Hayes and other legitimate military leaders to begin implementing security reforms and oversight procedures that had gradually limited Kane's network's ability to operate. Even before his death, Marcus's work had been saving lives through changes he would never know about. The legacy protocol that Marcus established has continued operating for 15 years, Rivera revealed. The network of military personnel he recruited and trained has been providing information to General Hayes and other reform-minded leaders, contributing to investigations and prosecutions that have cleaned up billions of dollars in corruption across multiple defense contracting relationships. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what her investigation had ultimately revealed. The 600 Mustang hadn't just contained evidence of one conspiracy. It had been the key that unlocked a systematic effort to reform military procurement and protect soldiers from the kind of institutional corruption that had been claiming lives for years. Lucas, who had been listening to Rivera's revelations with growing amazement, finally found his voice. So Marcus wasn't just trying to expose one criminal operation. He was building a whole system to prevent military corruption from harming soldiers in the future. Exactly, Rivera confirmed. And that system is still operating today, still protecting soldiers, still preventing the kind of crimes that Kane's network was committing. The restoration of this Mustang didn't just bring justice for past crimes. It validated and strengthened ongoing efforts to ensure military integrity. David Hayes arrived at the garage just as Rivera was concluding his presentation, and his reaction to the legacy protocol documents was deeply emotional. For 15 years, he had believed his son's death had been a tragic waste, a young soldier's idealism crushed by institutional indifference to corruption. Learning that Marcus had actually succeeded in building something that continued protecting other soldiers transformed his understanding of his son's sacrifice. He did it, David said quietly, studying the communications records that proved Marcus's network had been operating successfully for years. He actually built something that lasted, something that continued protecting soldiers even after he was gone. Anna was examining the financial analysis that showed how much corruption had been prevented through Marcus's legacy protocol. The numbers were staggering: hundreds of millions in recovered funds, dozens of criminal prosecutions, systematic reforms that had protected thousands of soldiers from substandard equipment and dangerous deployments. But for Sarah, the most meaningful revelation was personal rather than financial or institutional. Rivera had brought one final document, a letter that Marcus had written specifically for whoever eventually restored his Mustang and discovered his evidence. It had been held by General Hayes for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to be delivered. The letter was addressed simply, to the mechanic who saved my car, and its contents provided the emotional completion that Sarah had been seeking without realizing it. If you are reading this, then my legacy protocol worked exactly as I planned it. The evidence in my car led you to expose the corruption I died fighting, and that exposure triggered the release of information that proves my sacrifice wasn't meaningless. I want you to know that I chose to hide my evidence in the Mustang because I understood that only someone who truly cared about restoration, about bringing broken things back to life, would have the patience and dedication to find what I had hidden. I needed someone who understood that some things are worth saving even when they seem beyond repair. You've done more than restore a car. You've restored justice for soldiers who died protecting secrets they hoped someone would someday have the courage to reveal. You've restored honor to a military system that was being corrupted from within. Most importantly, you've restored hope that individual courage and dedication can triumph over institutional power when the cause is righteous. The Mustang was never just transportation for me. It was a symbol of the American dream, the idea that honest work and determination can build something beautiful and lasting. By completing its restoration, you've proven that symbol remains valid even in a world where some people choose profit over principle and power over justice. Thank you for seeing past the rust and decay to the potential beneath. Thank you for refusing to let sleeping secrets remain buried. Thank you for having the courage to do what was right rather than what was safe. The car is yours now completely and permanently. Drive it knowing that it carries the gratitude of hundreds of soldiers whose lives were saved by your investigation and the eternal respect of one soldier whose death finally meant something because you refused to let the truth die with him. Marcus Hayes with profound gratitude and endless hope for the future. Sarah read the letter twice, her eyes blurring with tears that represented not sadness, but completion, the satisfaction of promises kept and purposes fulfilled. The Mustang sat gleaming in the garage's sunlight, no longer just a restored classic car, but a monument to the power of individual courage and the persistence of truth. Rivera gathered his materials and prepared to leave, but not before making one final presentation that would complete the circle of justice and remembrance. He produced a small package wrapped in plain paper, explaining that it contained something General Hayes had wanted the garage to have as a permanent memorial. Inside was a simple brass plaque designed to be mounted on the Mustang's dashboard, where it would be visible to anyone who sat in the driver's seat. The inscription was brief but powerful, in memory of Staff Sergeant Jessica Collins, Specialist Marcus Hayes, Corporal Tommy Rodriguez, and all soldiers who died protecting the truth. Their sacrifice ensured that others would live. Their courage proved that justice is never truly buried. Their legacy continues in every life saved by their dedication to honor. Below the inscription was a small American flag and the motto that had guided Marcus's network: truth costs, silence costs more. Sarah ran her fingers over the plaque's inscription, understanding that this was how the story was meant to end. Not with revenge or bitterness, but with remembrance and continuing purpose. The Mustang would serve as both transportation and memorial, a working reminder that individual courage could triumph over institutional corruption when people chose truth over comfort. As the months turned into years, the Hayes Collins Memorial Garage became a pilgrimage site for veterans and their families, people who came to see the Mustang that had exposed one of the largest military corruption scandals in American history. But more importantly, it continued serving its practical purpose of helping living veterans build new careers and new lives. Sarah often drove the Mustang on quiet evenings, feeling the connection to Marcus and Jessica and all the other soldiers whose courage had made her own investigation possible. The car ran exactly as Marcus had envisioned it, would smooth and powerful and reliable, a machine built to last and to honor the dreams of those who had believed in it. The restoration was complete, but the legacy would continue for as long as people remembered that some secrets were too important to remain buried and some truths were worth any price to defend. The 600er Mustang had delivered its message across 15 years, and in doing so, it had proven that justice, like a well-built car, could survive almost any amount of neglect and abuse if someone was willing to do the work necessary to bring it back to life. In the end, Sarah reflected as she watched the sun set through the garage's windows. That was what restoration really meant. Not just returning something to its original condition, but making it better than it had ever been before, stronger and more beautiful because of everything it had survived. The Mustang gleamed in the fading light, carrying the dreams of the dead and the hopes of the living, a testament to the power of truth and the persistence of justice. Some legacies Sarah had learned were indeed built to last forever.